While modern alien invasion blockbusters bombard audiences with relentless CGI and explosive set pieces, The Day the Earth Stood Still achieved something far more profound with minimal resources. Released in 1951, this classic demonstrated that cinematic power often lies in implication rather than spectacle. Some critics argue that modern filmmakers have lost sight of this principle. The film's brilliance stemmed from its restraint. While many sci-fi films today showcase elaborate alien designs, director Robert Wise understood that the most unsettling threats are often those left partially unseen. Gort, the towering robot, becomes far more intimidating through a clever lighting and shadow than many viewers find most digital monsters to be. His iconic laser beam, created with a simple spotlight and smoke, arguably delivers more impact than many modern effects-laden sequences. Bernard Herrmann's eerie theremin score became the film's secret weapon, crafting an atmosphere of unease that many believe surpasses what modern orchestras and synthesizers can achieve. The theremin's haunting tones tapped into primal fears, establishing a sonic identity that remains unmatched. Michael Rennie's portrayal of Klaatu remains one of cinema's most dignified alien visitors, measured, calm, and convincing without the aid of prosthetics or motion capture. His performance proved that true otherworldliness can emerge from nuanced acting rather than visual effects. Critics suggest that this approach left a lasting impression that many modern blockbusters fail to replicate. While today's CGI-heavy films often fade from memory, The Day the Earth Stood Still continues to inspire filmmakers, reinforcing the idea that substance often outshines spectacle. Ever wondered what happens when sci-fi stops battling aliens and starts battling the human mind? Forbidden Planet takes us on a wild, technicolor trip into the subconscious where our own fears become the real monsters. Released in 1956, this MGM production reimagined Shakespeare's The Tempest as a Freudian sci-fi parable, delving into the human subconscious in ways that today's formulaic blockbusters often avoid. Its most groundbreaking element wasn't the vibrant technicolor visuals or Robbie the Robot's charm, but its portrayal of the mind as the ultimate threat. The id monster, an invisible force born from Dr. Morbius's repressed desires, posed a chilling question. What if our own minds are the true danger? Many critics argue that this internalized horror stands in stark contrast to the external threats favored by contemporary sci-fi. The creature's translucent form, achieved through innovative animation and optical effects, unsettled audiences precisely because it visualized the intangible. Some suggest that modern CGI, despite its polish, rarely captures the same psychological depth. Lewis and B.B. Barron's pioneering electronic score intensified the film's eerie tone. Using oscillators and tape loops, they created a soundscape that seemed to emanate from the character's inner turmoil. This innovation predated synthesizers and proved that creativity often trumps technology. Critics also highlight the film's production design, which offered a tactile, immersive world that many modern space epics struggle to replicate. Its sets felt lived in, grounding the fantastical in a sense of reality. What if the person you love most suddenly became a stranger, emotionless, unrecognizable, and impossible to stop? Released in 1956, Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers made conformity itself the villain, without relying on elaborate effects or dystopian world-building. Its premise was chillingly simple. Alien pods replace humans with emotionless duplicates. This allegory resonated deeply during the McCarthy era, when suspicion and political paranoia ran high. Many scholars argue that this subtle commentary remains more effective than the overt messaging in many modern dystopias. Siegel's use of shadow and close-ups heightened the tension. The greenhouse scene, where a pod person is discovered mid-transformation, relied on lighting and framing rather than gore, creating a suspense that critics say feels more immediate than many of today's high-budget thrillers. The film's ambiguous ending, Kevin McCarthy's frantic warnings on the highway, left audiences with lingering unease. This lack of resolution proved more haunting than any tidy conclusion, a quality that many believe modern films often lack. Rumors suggest studio executives pushed for a more hopeful ending, but Siegel's original vision of unresolved dread ultimately prevailed, cementing the film's legacy. Picture a man's world growing larger and more terrifying with every passing day, as his very sense of self begins to vanish. The incredible shrinking man turns this nightmare into cinematic reality. Released in 1957, this adaptation of Richard Matheson's novel explored not just physical transformation, but the erosion of identity and meaning. Grant Williams delivered a performance that elevated the film beyond spectacle. As Scott Carey shrinks, his growing insignificance becomes a metaphor for mortality and isolation. Critics argue that this inward journey resonates more deeply than the external threats common in modern sci-fi. The film's practical effects, oversized props, forced perspective, and detailed miniatures created a believable world where everyday objects became monumental. A basement became a wilderness, a spider, a monstrous adversary. These tactile visuals, many suggest, offer a realism that CGI often lacks. Matheson's script posed profound questions. What defines a person when their presence vanishes? Can consciousness persist without recognition? The climactic battle with the spider, fought among thread spools and matchboxes, became a symbolic struggle against an indifferent universe. The film's ending, where Carey embraces his continued existence even as he shrinks beyond visibility, is widely regarded as one of the most philosophically ambitious in cinema. It offers no easy answers, only the suggestion that meaning exists at every scale. Trapped in the Arctic with something you can't see, can't understand, and definitely can't control, the thing from another world proves that sometimes what you don't show is scarier than anything you could. Released in 1951, this Arctic-set thriller, directed by Christian Nyby and shaped by Howard Hawks' style, laid the groundwork for countless outpost horror films. The film's overlapping dialogue and rapid-fire exchanges created a sense of realism that critics say remains unmatched. This naturalistic banter heightened the tension as characters faced an unknown threat, influencing later classics like Alien and John Carpenter's remake. Rather than showcasing the creature in full, the film relied on suggestion, shadows, silhouettes, and terrified reactions. This restraint, many argued, generated more suspense than explicit visuals. The scene where the alien is discovered frozen in ice exemplifies how practical effects and careful framing can evoke genuine dread. The isolated setting became a character in itself. Scientists, military personnel, and journalists clashed over how to respond, reflecting Cold War anxieties about authority and knowledge. This ideological friction added depth to the narrative. Some critics believe the film's lasting impact stems from its refusal to explain the alien's origins, preserving a sense of mystery that modern films often sacrifice for exposition. What if the aliens landing in your backyard weren't here to destroy us, but just wanted to go home? It came from outer space flips the script, making empathy, not fear, the heart of its story. Released in 1953, Jack Arnold's desert-set film portrayed aliens not as invaders, but as misunderstood visitors, a perspective that remains uncommon even today. Based on Ray Bradbury's treatment, the story follows extraterrestrials stranded on Earth, assuming human forms to gather materials for repairs. Their actions stem from necessity, not hostility. Critics argue that this shift in motivation created a narrative driven by misunderstanding rather than malice. Arnold's direction transformed the Mojave Desert into an alien landscape. Natural lighting and stark rock formations created an eerie atmosphere without relying on futuristic sets. This grounded approach, scholars note, enhanced the film's themes of isolation and otherness. The film's use of three-dimensional cinematography was more than a gimmick. Sequences where meteors seemed to fly toward the audience immersed viewers in the protagonist's experience. Critics suggest this technique served the story rather than distracting from it. The film's message of tolerance, delivered nearly a decade before the civil rights movement gained momentum, positioned science fiction as a platform for social commentary. Its plea for understanding over fear remains strikingly relevant. If you had to choose who gets a ticket off a dying planet, could you live with your decision? When Worlds Collide isn't just a disaster movie, it's a gut-punching look at who we become when everything's on the line. Released in 1951, this disaster epic posed a harrowing question: who deserves to survive when Earth faces annihilation? Directed by Rudolf Mate, the film follows scientists racing to build a rocket to escape the impending collision with the rogue planet Belus. With room for only a few dozen passengers, society must decide who lives and who dies. Critics argue that this moral dilemma adds emotional weight often missing from modern disaster films. Rather than focusing solely on destruction, the film centers on human drama. Families are torn apart, ethical lines blur, and desperation mounts. These personal stakes, many believe, create a tension more compelling than CGI-driven chaos. Chesley Bonestell's astronomical artwork lent scientific credibility to the visuals. Matte paintings of Bellis and the rocket's journey influenced the visual language of later disaster films. The film's effects, supervised by Gordon Jennings, earned an Academy Award. The flooding of New York, achieved with miniatures and optical tricks, remains a benchmark for practical effects. Critics note that these sequences still evoke awe without relying on digital tools. Before Godzilla, before the kaiju craze, there was The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the movie that turned nuclear nightmares into rampaging monsters and changed creature features forever. Released in 1953, this film introduced a new kind of monster, one born from nuclear testing, and laid the foundation for the kaiju genre. Ray Harryhausen's stop-motion Redosaurus was a technical marvel. Each movement was painstakingly animated, giving the creature a lifelike presence that critics say surpasses many modern digital beasts. Its radioactive blood added a chilling layer, symbolizing the unseen dangers of atomic fallout. The film's premise, nuclear tests awakening a prehistoric creature, tapped into Cold War anxieties. Unlike earlier monsters born of fantasy, this one was a direct consequence of human actions. Film historians note that this shift marked a turning point in monster cinema. The climax at Coney Island, where the beast rampages through an amusement park, set the standard for urban destruction scenes. The sequence's pacing and practical effects demonstrated how suspense could be built methodically. The film's influence was immediate. Japanese producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, inspired by its success, commissioned Godzilla the following year. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms had created the blueprint for atomic age monster films. What if the real tragedy of a monster movie was that the monster never wanted to be one? 20 million miles to Earth makes you root for the creature, turning a rampage into a heartbreaking journey. Released in 1957, Ray Harryhausen's masterpiece introduced the Emir, an alien being whose tragic journey from Venus to Rome transformed the traditional monster rampage into something approaching Shakespearean tragedy. Harryhausen's stop-motion animation imbued the reptilian creature with an emotional depth that modern CGI struggles to match. Each painstakingly crafted frame revealed the Emir's confusion and fear as it navigated an alien world, growing larger and more desperate with each encounter. Unlike the deliberately menacing beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the Emir's movements conveyed vulnerability, a displaced being reacting to threats rather than seeking destruction. Film scholars consistently argue that Harryhausen's technique of animating the creature's eyes and the subtle body language created genuine pathos, making audiences sympathize with the monster rather than simply fear it. The decision to set the climactic battle within Rome's ancient Colosseum created a visual metaphor that elevated the film beyond typical creature features. Director Nathan Juran deliberately juxtaposed the Emir's otherworldly presence against humanity's most iconic arena, where gladiators once fought for survival. This setting transformed the creature's final stand into a gladiatorial spectacle, with the alien as an unwilling participant forced to fight for its life against overwhelming odds. Critics argue that this classical backdrop lent the monster's destruction a tragic dignity that suburban or urban settings couldn't provide. Harryhausen's meticulous attention to the Emir's growth sequence demonstrated how technical innovation could serve emotional storytelling. The creature's transformation from small, curious being to towering giant wasn't merely a special effects showcase. Each stage revealed new aspects of its personality and increasing desperation. The animator's use of rubber molds and wire armatures, combined with careful lighting that emphasized the creature's leathery scales, created a being that felt both alien and strangely familiar. Film historians note that this approach influenced decades of sympathetic monster portrayals, from King Kong remakes to modern creature features that prioritize character development over pure spectacle. The film's blend of adventure, horror, and genuine empathy established a template for monster movies that treated their creatures as tragic figures rather than simple antagonists. How far would you go for scientific discovery? And what if it cost you everything you love? The Fly takes body horror to a whole new level, making the monster story terrifyingly personal. Released in 1958, Kurt Newman's adaptation of George Langeland's short story didn't just explore scientific hubris like previous atomic age thrillers, it weaponized the intimate bonds of marriage and family against audiences in ways that remain psychologically devastating decades later. The film's genius lies in its structural inversion of traditional monster narratives. Rather than building toward the creature's reveal, The Fly opens with Helene Delambra's apparent murder of her husband Andre, then slowly peels back layers of domestic tragedy through flashback. This approach forces viewers to witness the gradual dissolution of a loving marriage as Andre's teleportation experiments literally tear him apart at the molecular level. Unlike the external threats faced by previous protagonists, Andre's transformation represents an internal corruption that no amount of scientific knowledge or heroic determination can reverse. The film's most haunting sequences occur not during the climactic spiderweb encounter, but in the quiet moments between husband and wife as Andre's humanity slowly fragments. Patricia Owens delivers a performance of mounting horror as Helene realizes her husband's condition is irreversible, while Al Hedison's increasingly desperate attempts to communicate through typed notes create an intimacy that makes his eventual fate unbearable. Critics argue that this domestic focus transforms body horror into relationship horror, where the true terror stems from watching love become helpless against scientific catastrophe. The iconic "Help Me" revelation works precisely because it arrives after audiences have invested emotionally in Andre's struggle. When his tiny, human-headed form appears trapped in the spider's web, the moment delivers not just shock, but genuine heartbreak. The scene's power derives from its contrast with earlier domestic scenes. The same voice that once whispered endearments now squeaks desperately for salvation that will never come. Film scholars note that this emotional foundation separates the original from later remakes that prioritize visceral transformation effects over psychological devastation. The film's exploration of scientific responsibility extends beyond typical cautionary tales through its focus on unintended consequences within family structures. Andre's experiments don't threaten humanity or unleash atomic monsters. They simply destroy one man's ability to remain human for the people who love him most. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.